chapter 5, verses 22 to 42. Then one of the leaders of the synagogue named Jairus came, and when he saw him, fell at his feet and begged him repeatedly, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her, so that she may be made well and live." So he went with him, and a large crowd followed him and pressed in on him. Now there was a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years. She had endured much under many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and she was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard about Jesus, and came up behind him in the crowd, and touched his cloak, for she said, "If I but touch his clothes, I will be made well." Immediately her hemorrhage stopped, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. Immediately aware that power had gone forth from him, Jesus turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" And his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing in on you. How can you say, 'Who touched me?'" He looked all around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, fell down before him, and told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." While he was still speaking, some people came from the leader's house to say, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the leader of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." He allowed no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the house of the leader of the synagogue, he saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. When he had entered, he said to them, "Why do you make a commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. Then he put them all outside, and took the child's father and mother, and those who were with him, and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha kum," which means, "Little girl, get up." And immediately the girl got up and began to walk about. She was 12 years of age. At this they were overcome with amazement. God's word for God's people.
Our Speaker and our bodies respond.
So I told the kids we were going to talk about 12 years with the adults. 12 years. Is it a long time or a short time? If we asked the woman who had been suffering from hemorrhaging for 12 years, who had spent all her money trying to get help from different physicians, failing and failing, a woman who lived in a culture that said that if you had bleeding, you were unclean, and anybody who touched you would become unclean. A woman who could not possibly be married because, of course, having intercourse with someone who was bleeding was completely forbidden. So a woman who was really isolated, who had lost all her resources, who really was told she didn't belong, she needed to be back away so that she wouldn't be tainting the good people. Was 12 years a very long time or a short time? How might she answer that question? The parents who had a little girl who they loved and they raised her up, she was only 12 years old. They'd only had her for 12 years, and now she was dying? Is 12 years a long time or a short time? It depends upon who you ask. There's so many times when we can think we know, okay, this should happen now, or let's take our time. We need more thought. We need more prayer. You can't expect our culture to change too quickly. We should take more time. Is the time we want to take short or long? And who do we listen to when we make that decision? Do we listen more carefully to the people who are suffering in that time? Who had the hardest time holding still this morning? Journey, who's 3? Or some of us who thought, oh, great, I don't even have to stand up or do anything. I'm just going to sit and chill. It depends. Is a minute long? Is 12 years long? On this very weekend, as many of us have heard, the United Methodist Church is having this giant general conference where people, United Methodists from all over the world, are gathering, and they're sharing their different ideas and their different proposals, trying to decide, will the United Methodist Church remain united, or will it splinter apart? And what this amounts to is that global church is going to vote. They're going to vote on whether or not LGBTQ people belong in the full life and membership of the church. Could they, should they ordain folks who happen to be gay, lesbian, whatever? Right now, the answer in that church is no. No. They have in California, Minneapolis, California, they have a bishop who is an open lesbian, and there are many parts of the Methodist Church in this country that feel very much that call to be inclusive. On the other hand, there are parts of the country, the South is one of them, and there are people all over the world who think otherwise, that the Bible, they say, is clear, they say, on whether or not people who are LGBTQ should be invited into the full worship life in the church. So they're voting. Some of our friends and family members who fall into that category know all too well what it feels like to be voted on. In my last church, where we were working for equal marriage rights in Maine, it was powerful because so many people dared to tell their stories, and we dared to find out. Dorothy was awesome about speaking up and saying, when she came out as lesbian, it was kind of transformative for the people who knew her because it was too late. They already loved her. She was a kindergarten teacher who had been so wonderful with their children, so reliable. So it was too late to decide, oh yeah, she was living this alternate weirdo lifestyle. Turned out, no, she was one of God's beautiful people and fully being who she was. But when we tell our stories, and when we dare to listen to people whose experiences aren't quite the same as ours, we can develop different ideas about what we should be voting for. How dare we presume to vote? How dare we have a church that tries to carve out space for exclusion? We live in a broken world, and today is not the day to say, well, look at us in the UCC, how cool are we? I mean, we are kind of cool, you gotta admit that. The first gay man was ordained by the UCC Church in 1972. I'm not good at math, but that's like more than 40 years ago, right? Like 47? Ron, you're better at math, is that right? 72, 2019. It's a lot of years, right? And I remember, because I was there in this country where the UCC Church had a conversation about whether, as a body, we would support equal marriage rights when they didn't exist in this country. And at that time, I had dual standing. I served a church that was United Methodist and UCC. I had been ordained in the United Methodist Church, but I grew up in the UCC Church. So dual standing, kind of a foot in either side, and I went to this general gathering for the UCC church where there would be this talk, this debate about equal marriage rights. And I thought, still my heart, where did I find these people? Because almost no one spoke against it, and even those who did just hardly did. And there was such overwhelming affirmation. Of course we should support people who are in love being married. It was awesome. So is the time it takes to change our thinking from who can marry, who can have a safe, reliable existence with the person they love, who can walk in the door at church holding hands or sitting near each other. Is it a long time or a short time to cause us to acknowledge everyone's rights? For those folks who take a knee before a football game, now before a basketball game, because they know that people of color are not experiencing the same justice that people with lighter colored skin are in this country. For those folks who we want to say, oh, we're looking into this, we're training a little bit better, be patient, these things take time. Is the time it takes for justice to occur long or short? Ask Trayvon's father how long it's taking for justice to occur. Is it too long?
You can't get out this way.
When people who are not quite the same as us name something that is wrong,
You can't get out.
how do we listen? How do we hear that? If I'm comfortable, can I be comfortable? Can I say, it's good enough for me if someone out there is saying, this is really not okay, this is unjust. If we hear there's an emergency, we have to build a wall, at the same time as we know our brothers and sisters in Flint, Michigan are forced to give their babies poisoned water, which of those would we say is an emergency? And how dare we drink our own safe water when we are tolerating other people in this country having unsafe water? Is that, what's the emergency? How long is too long to work on water purity and to ensure that every municipality, which according to law is supposed to have drinkable water, how long is too long to make sure that sort of justice occurs? How long is too long for parents to be able to send their babies to school and reliably expect to be getting their child alive at the end of the day? How long is too long to say, we need some sort of reasonable background checks? We need something that makes our babies safer. When the cost of insulin has gone up exponentially in the past few years, while the composition of insulin has not changed at all, really, when that has just gone off the charts, and most of us don't have diabetes, how long is too long to work on fair costs of prescription medicine? When some of us are saying, oh my word, I don't know, will I pay my rent or my health care? Really, my health care is more than my rent. What should I pay this month? How long is too long? And are churches too political when they say, people are suffering, It is not right. People should not be voted on. People who pay the same taxes as we do should be able to let their kids, their teenagers, go out the door to go for a walk for Skittles and expect their teenagers to come home without being shot by a vigilante. People who are driving in a car and stopped for speeding should not have to depend on the color of their skin for an amicable interaction with a police officer. And that's not to pick on police officers, many of whom are, that takes a lot of courage, it takes a lot of strength. We depend on those people. The trouble is, police officers are no different from the rest of us. And when we think we're such good people, we can't possibly be racist because we're nice. I'm a very nice person. But do you know that there are tests that give you pictures and they ask you to come up with words and make quick judgments? And people like me, who are very nice people, who don't mean to be racist, who, if you ask us, no, we would never do that. And yet, when we make snap decisions, there's racism, right, bubbling out of our brains. Not because we're intentionally bad, but because we grew up in a culture where racism is insidious and it comes and worms its way into our thinking and our reaction without us being able to have much volitional control. So what do? If it's time to talk about white privilege and we think, oh, I worked hard. My parents worked really hard to provide an education for us and blah, blah, blah. And why doesn't everybody pull themselves up by their bootstraps? We don't need to talk about white privilege. Is that true? And who are we listening to when we make those decisions? Black History Month is always revelatory for me, and it shouldn't be. I'm always shocked that it is. Kay knew, but I did not. That beautiful Central Park in New York City, it exists on land that was seized by public domain from a strong, thriving African-American community that was building businesses, healthy neighborhoods, but there were wealthy people who wanted to spread out a little more, and really property values would be so much higher if they had this nice big open park. So those businesses, those homes were leveled, and now as you enjoy Central Park, we miss the story that families who are pulling themselves up by their bootstraps, who are establishing businesses and homes, lost all of that. So people with white privilege could have a lovely park and higher property values. So if someone says, we really need to know more about racism, we really need to know more about white privilege, is it enough to say, well, our church specializes in LGBTQ issues. We're good on that. Is that okay? Or is it important that we let God move our hearts? How long is 12 years? How long is too long? And who do we listen to when some people are hurting? My prayer for all of us as we get ready for Lent. Remember Ash Wednesday Eve? It's an opportunity to get a jump on Lent. As we get our hearts ready for that, my big prayer is that we can really examine what we give up. And by what we give up, maybe we could give up a little bit of the surety that our worldview is so perfect. And maybe we could look to the right or the left to pay attention to who's hurting and who is asking for change and then say, by God, how do I listen with all my heart? In Jesus' name, amen.